And joining me live to discuss, I would like to welcome our panel for this evening. John McCarthy, Democratic strategist and former senior advisor to President Biden, and John Thomas, Republican strategist. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. I'm spoiled for choice for Johns. Maybe we start with John McCarthy. We have the S&P 500 seeing a record closing high after this economic data coming in. Are you surprised to see these numbers?
Well, I think that any American should applaud good economic data. I think that's a nonpartisan issue. You want to see the country succeed. That said, I think that if you ask any American who went out shopping these last few weeks, they would tell you that they think that costs are still high. 6 in 10 Americans are saying that costs are outpacing their income. People are expecting to pay up to 26% more across the board for holiday gifts this year. So, I don't think that people are feeling that yet. And the problem that the president and the Republicans in Congress are going to run into politically with this is if they keep saying that the economy is great, people aren't going to buy it. The other thing is the president's not really focusing the most valuable resource he has, which is his time and his bully pulpit, to talk about the economy either.
John Thomas, do you see this as a political liability, even with this relatively good economic data, that's not going to, that most Americans are not going to be feeling it on a day-to-day basis?
John actually brings up a good point I would agree with, which is just because if the actual economy is doing well by the numbers, but the American people either aren't feeling it or don't believe it, the economy might as well not be doing well. And so the challenge that President Trump has, and I think this happens to almost every president, is they get kind of wrapped up in the bubble that is the Oval Office and they get a bit disconnected or detached from their voters. And so you started to see, I think, President Trump recognizing that in the last couple of weeks. That's why he's gone back out on the trail, particularly into areas like battleground areas like Pennsylvania, taking his message directly to the voter to remind them that his policies are working. And that's also been the trouble here, Claire, is President Trump's economic policies, particularly the tariff policies, using that as a whipping mechanism to force foreign investment into AI and others. There is a delayed benefit for the American people. And so President Trump has to ask for patience and grace from the people that, although the GDP numbers are doing well, that they're going to feel it in their pocketbook, certainly before we go to the midterms.
So even without looking at the effect of tariffs, in January, many Americans are going to feel the effects of a couple of Trump administration policies. We've got some student loan borrowers will have their wages seized. Millions of Americans will see their health costs go up after the Republicans didn't pass health care subsidies. John McCarthy, do you think that this is going to be compounding problems for people who already feel the pinch of the cost of living?
Yeah, I mean, it might not feel like it, but we're just 1 year into this thing. And I will say it's a very different picture than when we entered in 2025, right? Republicans were elected with this mandate to lower costs. Donald Trump came to the presidency. Republicans controlled both chambers in Congress, and they were given that simple message. In the last year, they now own this economy and people aren't feeling great about it. I think that's why you're starting to see such a mass exodus from people who are announcing that they're not seeking re-election. You're beginning to see a big kind of schism inside of the president and the Republican Party's base. So people are knowing that this is not going to age well.
John Thomas, a lot to unpack there. What do you make of John McCarthy's remarks?
Well, let's focus primarily on, I think, the student debt issue. And I think that's really one more of fairness and integrity as the president and the Republicans see it, which is if you take out debt, that you owe it back, particularly if it's taxpayer money that was loaned to you. Republicans don't think it's fair necessarily that a non-college educated factory worker should be subsidizing via free money a lawyer. It's just something doesn't sit right with that. And so that lawyer who took out debt, yes, in fact, does need to pay it back. Just like every other American, when they borrow, they have to pay it back.
That might be a difficult case to make to the voters. Do you think do you think people will be sympathetic to that argument, John Thomas?
Well, I think it's I think depends on the voter, right? The non-college educated certainly would find that to be fair. I think people who understand the basics of if I borrow something, I'm kind of expected to give it back. And also Americans who care about inflation. The government can't just be giving away free money because that becomes inflationary. So it's up to the president to sell it. It's also up to the president to say, well, fairness of if you borrow money, you have to pay it back. I'm also bringing down costs. I'm increasing GDP. I'm increasing worker productivity. He has to point to all the other elements that are directly benefiting Americans.
Now, John McCarthy, you mentioned some splits within the Republican Party. I want to ask you a little bit more about this because we've seen now more than a dozen staff members from the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, leaving that organization to join a different group that is run by the former Vice President Mike Pence. What are your thoughts on why this is happening?
Well, I've deferred to the other John in terms of the expertise in the Republican Party here, but there's a few things that I would say. Heritage Foundation is a great legacy Republican organization, that I think has been for a while now out of step with Donald Trump. They've tried to recreate themselves a couple times. I don't know that moving over to Mike Pence is really the future of the Republican Party. I think we continue to see that party moves further and further to the extremes. But the bigger picture we're seeing here is that Donald Trump is really a lame duck president. And the Republican Party is starting to move away. In, any other normal circumstance here, the media, the people in Congress, elected officials inside of a party apparatus would start thinking about what's next. And if you're someone who's an elected official in your 20s or your 30s or your 40s, you're not looking to be tied up with Donald Trump right now. You're looking to find the next thing that's going to keep propelling you down the road. And it's probably not going to be this kind of far-right extremism.
And Vice President Pence saying that people are coming their way, and I'm quoting here, because the reason they have people coming our way is that Heritage and some other voices and commentators have embraced big government populism. John Thomas, do you think that's what's behind this?
There certainly is a rift for the soul of the future of the Republican Party. I think it's going to require the next presidential nominee to kind of unite these factions. As John's right, there's a lot of the voters in the Republican Party are already looking forward to the next presidential cycle and the midterm cycle. And look, the Republicans are rooted in what we call the rugged individual, meaning they have strong opinions on a variety of issues, and that sometimes makes it very difficult to find unity in a particular message. We saw this at the Turning Points conference over this last week. Hopefully the Republicans can get it together. I'm not totally convinced that they can in time for the midterms, but I'm hoping they can for the next presidential cycle.
Now, we just have a few seconds left, and it's only 2025, but because you mentioned it, the next Republican presidential nominee, John Thomas, any idea who that could be at this stage?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there's quite a few possible ones. I think the most obvious ones, obviously, are the vice president. He is top of the polling right now. It is way too early to call it a coronation at this point. Certainly, Secretary of State Rubio has the chops, and there's other governors. There's Senator Cruz from Texas is taking a look. I think it's far too early to say who's the likely favorite, but certainly we would be remiss if we counted out the vice president, Vance. He's certainly going to be a formidable contender as we see a lot of scrums for the top dog.
That's fair. I'd agree it's way too early, but I'll put the question to John McCarthy as well. Nonetheless, who do you see as a promising political talent within the Republican Party?
Oh, in the Republican Party, I would say, I think that the vice president is probably the person to beat. But I will say I actually am very proud as a Democrat because we actually have such a wonderful bench. I think any single one of the Democratic governors around the country would make an excellent president. But whoever the nominee is on either side, I would actually love to see someone from outside of politics, maybe from the business or community sphere, someone who can kind of help just break the fever of what's happening in Washington.
Well, John McCarthy and John Thomas, thank you to both of you this evening. We very much appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Claire.